I'm Josh Schneiderweiler. Coming up on Football Today.
Jair Bolsonaro ran on a socially conservative agenda. He opposes abortion, has defended unequal pay for women, advocated for a tougher stance on immigration, and opposes same-sex marriage.
You know all about Brazil being the great soccer power. They have great players. I can still remember Pelé and so many others. You've had a fantastic history. So we're going to exchange jerseys. I see that we got one, and this is the U.S. national team.
The president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, attended Sao Paulo's 1-1 draw at Santos on Saturday, inciting a mixture of boos and applause from the audience. This upcoming weekend, he plans to go to the Copa Libertadores final between Brazilian side Flamengo and Argentinian side River Plate. Since he was elected last year, he's been the center of attention at numerous Brazilian football matches around the country. Today we ask, how is Bolsonaro using football for his political advantage? And we profile a club battling his views.
Em visita à China, o presidente Jair Bolsonaro jantou com o presidente Xi Jinping durante o encontro.
The photo shows President Bolsonaro and President Xi Jinping standing together in a really grand hall, one imagines in the Chinese presidential palace, holding a red and black hooped Flamengo track top. Neither of them really looks like they're going to put it on. They're both wearing quite expensive looking suits.
Joshua Law is a freelance writer who covers Brazilian football.
But it shows that both of them understand the soft power that football can have, the soft political power. Bolsonaro is using the most famous football club in Brazil to get closer to as a tool to get closer to Chinese power, to create a link which already exists between Brazilian and Chinese football. There are plenty of players from Brazil playing in China. So it's a powerful image, I think, and shows both men's understanding of the importance of football as a political tool.
When that photo was taken, which was at the end of October, Bolsonaro also made some pretty, I thought, interesting comments. What did he say?
When that picture was taken, he said, "Sport, especially football, unites us."
E agora o Brasil todo é Flamengo. E com toda certeza, 1,3 bilhões de chineses também serão Flamengo.
We now have a big competition in South America. Now the whole of Brazil is Flamengo, talking about the Libertadores. And for sure, 1.3 billion Chinese people will also be at the end of November. He said, referring to the game that's going to take place on the 23rd of November in Lima, Peru. So he continued saying, "There's no greater moment of satisfaction for a politician than being welcomed by his people. It is similar to what we'll have when Gabigol scores the victory goal against River Plate," which is generally, I've not had that experience when I've been in the same football stadium as Jair Bolsonaro, that he doesn't get the same reception as a goal, but he's not far off sometimes.
So it almost seems as though Bolsonaro is trying to make the Copa Libertadores a nationalistic event between Brazil and Argentina.
I think he's using football as part of Brazil's national image. He is a nationalist. He's a very strong xenophobe, basically.
Known for his extreme views and history of racist, misogynistic, and homophobic remarks, Bolsonaro's election is part of a larger rise of far-right politicians around the globe.
But football has always been a strong part of Brazil's image of itself as a nation, ever since the early 20th century. So it's not something completely new, but he's reasserting that image of football as part of Brazil's power, perhaps, as a nation.
So by the time people will have listened to this, he will have attended the Sao Paulo Santos game, which happened on Saturday. Why would he go to a game like that?
It's certainly not the first time he's done something like this. He's been to several Brazilian league matches over the last few months, and he feels that it is a good place to be seen. He often gets quite a positive reception at football matches. He likes to be seen in front of people. He likes to be seen playing to the crowd. He loves the adulation he gets. He even loves some of the boos he receives from some of the crowd, I think. It brings him a lot of media attention. And he also conveys a message that that he is a man of the people, that he loves football like the Brazilian people.
You've mentioned the fact that he's been to numerous games like the Sao Paolo Santos games. How many are we talking about?
Perhaps half a dozen. Just specifically talking about league matches, perhaps half a dozen. And then there was the Copa America as well. So Brazil hosted the Copa America in summer 2019, Brazilian winter, European summer 2019. And he went to the opening game, the semi-final and the final of that. Last year, when he was still president-elect, before he'd taken office, he went to the Palmeiras game when they were presented the trophy as champions of Brazil. And he actually presented them the trophy. The CBF, the Brazilian Soccer Federation, the Football Federation, allowed him onto the stage on the pitch to give the trophy to the Palmeiras players. And it is also in their interest to get close to Bolsonaro because they want that proximity to political power.
So has that relationship between the CBF and Bolsonaro been strengthened?
Absolutely, yeah. Just before the Copa America, there were photos of Rogério Caboclo, who is the new president of the CBF, handing a Brazil shirt to Bolsonaro in the presidential palace in Brasilia. The CBF has been the target of a lot of corruption investigations from international police forces. The ex-president of the CBF is currently in prison in the United States, in New York. But within the country, the leaders of the CBF, the ex-presidents, have managed to avoid prosecution. And I think by creating that close link with Bolsonaro, they see that as a way of bolstering the CBF's political power and avoiding new investigations into the CBF in the future, which have to go through Congress. A lot of the investigations are done by members of Congress. So if they are close to Bolsonaro, they might avoid some of that unwanted attention.
So the CBF is trying to protect itself from investigations in the future, and Bolsonaro's trying to use the CBF to curry more political power and to show himself as more of one of the people.
Yeah, there's a phrase that Brazilian people use, one hand washes the other. I think it's a pretty clear case of that here.
I've read that he's also tried to co-opt the famous Brazilian national team yellow shirt for himself and nationalism. Have you noticed that?
Well, that was something that happened before Bolsonaro came to power or was really talked about as a potential presidential candidate. That symbol of the yellow shirt becoming a symbol of right-wing nationalism is something very, very clear, very obvious. I know a lot of people who wouldn't wear the shirt anymore for political reasons. That started during the Dilma Rousseff impeachment proceedings in 2016. So there were a lot of protests, anti-PT, the Workers' Party, anti-Lula, anti-Dilma. And those protests took on as a symbol the Brazilian flag, the yellow and green Brazilian flag, and the yellow national team shirt. And from there, it has continued and it's sort of transformed into a symbol of pro-Bolsonaro sentiment. There were a lot of people, for example, on the night of the election outside his house in Rio wearing the yellow shirt.
And so you said that you have friends that wouldn't wear the yellow shirt anymore. Has that dampened the support for the national team, or is it just for the shirt?
Both, I would say. The support, the dampening support for the national team, there are a lot of reasons for that aren't just to do with Bolsonaro. We don't really have time to go into them now. That's a whole other podcast, I think. But there are plenty of reasons, footballing reasons, performance reasons for the dampening support of the national team. But it certainly plays a part. The association of Bolsonaro with the national football team and its players is certainly off-putting to quite a substantial portion of the population.
Now, you've mentioned that he's gone to many games, both international and club games. What has been the reaction to him using football as kind of a political weapon or for his political advantage?
It's interesting. I mean, Brazilian society is very divided at the moment, like a lot of other societies are around the world. So, as you would expect, the reaction's been very mixed. I talked about that Palmeiras game where he presented them the trophy last year, and I was at that game, and the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. Palmeiras have gained a reputation as one of the clubs with the most expensive tickets in the country. So the people who are there are already more likely to be Bolsonaro supporters. He's a president of the wealthy elite. So the reaction was hugely positive. There were people screaming "Mito, Mito," which is legend, which his supporters often chant when they see him. But interestingly, there was one corner of the ground where the torcida organizada sit, the organized fan groups. These organized fan groups have bad reputations. They commit violent acts. They are sometimes related to organized crime and drug trafficking. But they're big organizations with diverse views, and a lot of them have quite strong political views. So the corner where the torcida organizada sat, when he walked past that, the boos were audible. And then that has grown, I think, with each game he's gone to, his popularity has clearly decreased a little bit. Even at the Brazil games, where again the tickets were very, very expensive, there was a clear mix of negative and positive reaction. There again, the people shouting "Mito, Mito," but there were audible boos at the Copa America final and the Copa America semi-final.
Bolsonaro is known for his inflammatory anti-LGBTQ and anti-indigenous rhetoric. Has that changed the rhetoric on the terraces?
I wouldn't say changed. You could say perhaps intensified. The Brazilian football stadium is and always has been a very macho, quite aggressive, homophobic, racist environment. For example, there was Atlético Mineiro fans who were chanting to Cruzeiro fans, their big rivals, that watch out, Bolsonaro is going to kill faggots, which is just despicable. But homophobic chanting has gone on for a long time at Brazilian football matches. So it's perhaps an intensification of the discourse rather than a complete change. On the other hand, there have been some positive movements. Recently, for the first time in South American football history, a game was stopped in the Brasileirão for homophobic chanting. So Vasco da Gama were playing Sao Paolo, and the Vasco fans were singing that Sao Paulo were a team of faggots. And the referee, Anderson Daronco, who deserves a lot of credit in this instance, stopped the game, told the Vasco manager and the Vasco players that he would not restart the game until the chanting stopped. The Vasco manager, Vanderlei Luxemburgo, went over to the fans, told them to stop. It was announced over the PA system. It stopped, and the game continued. It's interesting that as the president is the most homophobic, most violent, horrible man, there are also these groups that are trying to be progressive, trying to make positive social change happen still.
Coming up after the break, we'll tell you how one club is fighting back against Bolsonaro. If you like football content with a great blend of education and banter, then look no further than the Beautiful Game podcast. It's a podcast that doesn't just focus on football results. They have entertaining, topical debates and look to address social issues like discrimination and inequality. Darren Lewis, Kevin Lisby, Rob Harris, Miguel Delaney, and West Ham United women's footballer Julia Simic are just a few of the distinguished names that they've had on their podcast. I particularly really enjoyed the Darren Lewis episode that they had discussing race from a couple weeks ago, so if you need a jumping off point, maybe you can look there. So if you're looking to be educated whilst also having a laugh, then look no further than the Beautiful Game podcast. Now, back to Brazilian football. Well, let's look at one of those groups. You profiled Bahia, a club in Salvador, which is in the northeast of the country, for your website, Yellow and Green, and also for The Guardian. What are they doing that's so unique or different?
I guess this goes back to the beginning of the mandate of the current president. So in Brazil, football clubs have presidents, they're voted in. And at the start of his current mandate, a man called Guilherme Bellancini founded a part of the club called the Nucleus for Affirmative Actions. And through that, they have taken up a lot of social causes. For example, they've done things, anti-racism campaigns, anti-LGBT phobia campaigns. They've tried to make the football stadium a safer place for women. They've campaigned for the demarcation of indigenous lands. And they are trying to use the power that football has as a force for good, as a force for progressive changes in society.
And how successful have they been with some of these initiatives?
Hugely, I would say. They've brought a lot of attention to some of these issues that really weren't getting as much attention as they should. The example I use as the introduction in my article was the oil spill. So a ship spilled hundreds and hundreds of tons of oil into the sea around the northeast coast of Brazil. The oil was washing up on the beaches, and there was basically no reaction from the Bolsanaro government. They didn't send in people to clean it up. Bahia felt the issue wasn't getting the attention it deserved. So they went onto the pitch with oil stains, quote unquote, on their shirts, with black splodges on their shirts to draw attention to it. It went up in the news agenda. So they brought attention to that. They've also done a campaign for people to take paternity tests. So in Brazil, there are I think the statistic, there are 5.5 million children who don't have their father's name on their birth certificate. So they're taking issues that are important in society, and they provided free paternity tests for 3 days and confirmed the paternity of hundreds of men and united with them with their children, which is hugely important. It makes those men take responsibility for their children. It potentially provides a better future for those children. They are having a real, genuine impact, some of the campaigns. It's not just rhetoric, it's action.
And is this indicative of kind of the city or the region of Salvador, or is this kind of just the club and their fans?
It's absolutely indicative of the region. I was just looking at the statistics. So in the second round of the presidential election, which Bolsonaro won last year, Bolsonaro won with, I think, around 55% of the vote. In Bahia, in the state of Bahia, he got 27% of the vote, and his left-wing opposition candidate, Fernando Haddad, got 72.69% of the vote. So that tells you something about the political beliefs of the people who live there.
And what do the players at the club think? And I say that because I think it's important, as Bolsonaro is famous for receiving many endorsements from many prominent Brazilian players.
Yeah, this is an interesting point, I think. Like you say, huge numbers of footballers are very supportive of Bolsonaro. Felipe Melo is the one that comes to mind most strongly, but there's Lucas Moura, Kaká, Cafu, Ronaldinho, Rivaldo, hugely famous footballers who've thrown their weight behind Bolsonaro. And football not just on the stands, but in the dressing room, is very conservative in Brazil, even more so than in other countries, I think. So I would imagine that not all of the players have responded very kindly to this movement from Bahia. Their centre forward, their top scorer this season, Gilberto, celebrated one of his goals at the end of last year by doing the Jair Bolsonaro gun finger salute, which has become a symbol of support for Bolsonaro. So I can't imagine all of them have reacted very kindly. When I was there, I spoke to Douglas Friedrich, who is the goalkeeper, and he was very positive. He says he really enjoys doing the social side of stuff. He feels responsible as a player for giving something back to the people who support him, the people who effectively pay his wages. But the Bahia president did reiterate that he is not looking to impose any political belief on his players.
Is Bolsonaro a divisive issue for footballers in the country even today?
Yes, but the division is very strongly weighted in favor of Bolsonaro. I would say you can't ever tell, but just from the number of players who've come out in support and the number of players who've come out against Bolsonaro, I would guess that support for him is up 80 or 90% in football dressing rooms.
Do you anticipate other clubs in Brazil following Bahia's lead and being more socially active and maybe having more socially active fan bases as well, kind of as a result of this?
They have had some impact, a limited impact, I would say, but some. On Pride Day, LGBT Pride Day this year, more clubs either tweeted or did something showing their support for their LGBT fans. So there has been a slight shift, but football from the very top remains a very conservative part of society. The football clubs, like I said before, are run by presidents who are voted for by members, and a lot of those presidents will be people who are using football as a means of their own career or political advancement, and a lot of them will be very right-wing, old, white, rich. They will share a lot of the beliefs and the characteristics of Bolsonaro.
So we can expect in the future Bolsonaro to attend more games and lean into this even more.
Yes, I would suspect so, unless his popularity drops so much that the publicity becomes more negative than positive. I think he's very much of the school of thought of any publicity is good publicity, but if he is getting exclusively booed in football stadiums, that won't reflect well, and he might stop. We'll probably see him at the Libertadores final. We'll probably see him at the Maracanã when Flamengo lift the title, which is the most probable outcome at the moment. They're quite a long way ahead in the table. So, yes, I think he will continue going to football matches.
And he seems like many other leaders around the world, like Xi Jinping and Erdogan, who are using the sport for political gain.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's been a long history of using sport as a tool of soft power. I mean, you only need to look at the history of the Olympics to understand that, from Berlin 1936 all the way up to China in 2008. And football's no different. It's always been a tool of power, especially in Brazil. Since the days of Vargas, really, the dictator who ruled Brazil in the 1930s, 40s and 50s. So it is a continuation and perhaps an intensification of something which we've seen for a long time.
You can read all of Joshua Law's coverage of Brazilian football on Forbes, The Guardian, and Yellow and Green Football. The show is produced by John McKenzie. I'm Josh Schneider-Weiler, and this was Football Today. And if you enjoyed the show, please rate and review us on iTunes and share it with a friend. See you next time.